Okay, we stopped here for a moment to look at these shrubs along the edge of the trail. And you can see that they contain a pappus. A pappus is a seed attached to a little parachute. And most, if they were to see these pods, would think that they're looking at a milkweed. And interestingly enough, if you break branches when they're growing, they have that milky sap just like milkweeds do. But this is a dogbane, And if you have the name bane in a word, bane means poison. And dogbane is quite poisonous and quite dangerous. So it's not one you would wish to ingest. It has a pronounced effect on the heart, which can be quite dangerous. So we have a little area of dogbane, and truly one of their claims to fame, like milkweed, is that their stems contain a tremendous amount of fiber. And when those stems are used and the fiber is brought out and woven together, it makes beautiful cordage. So I remember when we were at Shale Creek, we talked about the American basswood, using the inner bark to make cordage. This is also very much a preferred species to make rope. So this basswood and milkweed as well are all very, very good for making rope. It's a nice natural rope that's created. Okay, right now Bay is just taking a look at this section of the lake just spanning across. The winds are picking up. Feels like it's in the upper 30s right now. So it's not a great day for trying to capture creatures in the water. Not for them and not for us. But we're going to talk to you a little bit now about the life in the water as we finish up this tour today. Okay, come on over here. And now that we're ready to look at some of the life around, we took our dip nets and we captured a few guys. And I want you to know that when it comes to life in the water, of course, there are many factors which influence that life. Primary among them would be light and oxygen. Those are primary in terms of determining what type of life can exist here. And then, of course, you have nutrients, you have carbon dioxide levels, you have current, you have temperature. These are all factors, obviously, that affect the life in this kind of system. But once again, the most important factors really do revolve around oxygen and light. In a terrestrial environment, the two most important factors are probably water and temperature, you know, when it comes to what life can exist where. Okay, so for us, with our collecting, you know, what we would like to have done today is a little biotic index for you. And I think I'd like you to know what a biotic index is. I have sheets here that we use in the field when we're conducting a biotic index. And basically, a biotic index is a matter of looking at the life in a system and determining the health of the system as a result of what life we find there. So the way the biotic index works is in this manner. Life is classified into three classes. The first class, what we call class 1 indicators, are completely pollution intolerant. So they cannot handle pollution at all. They're highly sensitive to pollution. Class 2 organisms are somewhat pollution tolerant. So they can exist in both clean and mildly polluted waters. Class 3 organisms are pollution tolerant. So they could be found in highly polluted waters as well as cleaner systems. So they can really tolerate a wide range of environments as a result. So class 1, class 2, and class 3 organisms. And in each class, as you look at this sheet, the class 1 organisms include stonefly nymphs, mayfly nymphs, hellgrammites, water pennies, etc. And each one of them is assigned a biotic value. In this case, their biotic value is 10. For class 2 organisms, that includes beetle larvae, cranefly larvae, scuds, clams and mussels, crayfish, and dragonfly and damselfly nymphs. Those are the water stages of dragonflies and damselflies, if you're not familiar with that. And they are assigned biotic values which range from 8 to 6s. And then thirdly, the class 3 organisms that can tolerate pollution include snails and sow bugs, leeches, worms, and midge larvae. And their biotic values range from 0 to 5. So the idea is this: when you go collecting with a group, ultimately what you want to do is collect ideally 100 invertebrates. And then once you collect these invertebrates throughout the entire area, you basically identify and count the numbers of each, and then multiply those numbers by the biotic value of each. And once you get them all added up, you divide by 10. And this gives you your biotic index value. If you can't collect 100, you collect 75. And then ultimately you divide by 7.5. Or you collect 50 and you divide by 5. And so this gives you an overall view of your class 1, class 2, and class 3 organisms, and then their biotic values. And so you just add them up and you do your divisions. And on this sheet, they give you the example. You collect 25 mayflies. 25 times their biotic value is 10, gives you 250. All the way down the line, you have 20 scuds. 20 times their biotic value is 6, gives you 120. And you add up all of these figures, and in this case it's 820, and then you divide by 10. And 82 is your ultimate biotic index value. And then you look at this scale, and you see that anything above 80 is considered excellent in terms of water quality. Between 60 and 79 is good. Between 40 and 59 is fair. And less than 40, the water quality is poor. When we do this work at this pond, generally we are at the upper end of fair. Close to good, but still in the upper end of fair. Okay. Few vultures that have come in, and there's a crow above us as well. So we have 2 vultures and a crow. So we have, oh, look at that. That's called a mobbing behavior. I don't know if Bay was able to grab that, but the crow is dive bombing the vulture. Bam, he's doing it again. And just as crows will do that to vultures, red-winged blackbirds will do that to crows. So a mobbing behavior is something we see often, actually. Smaller birds getting rid of larger birds from their neighborhood. It's called mobbing behavior. Okay, right now, Bay and I collected a handful of guys real quickly because, like I said, it's in the upper 30s right now, and it's a little cold to be collecting. I think the first thing I would have her look at would be the mussels. Looks like she's focusing on the mussels right now. And you see those mussels are highly striped. They look like zebra mussels, which are an invasive species of mussel in our area. And they've gathered on this stick, and there are lots of them. And they really pose a very substantial problem in our Great Lakes region. They reproduce tremendously, and their numbers can clog up intake pipes and water systems and through various manufacturing processes and plants, and they're hard to get rid of. And here's a bunch of them in this lake, zebra mussels. Now we also, Bay caught a nice fish, and it looks like a bluegill, striped on the side. And the bluegill is a member of the sunfish family, and probably, in terms of fishermen, the most commonly sought after panfish, not only in New York, but in the whole country, actually. So that's a bluegill, a little one. And right next to that bluegill is a sow bug. I don't know if Bay can get a look at that one, but the sow bug is one of our class 2, was it? Class 2 organisms. And sow bugs are what we call isopods. They're a type of crustacean, and generally speaking, one of our scavengers, one of our invertebrate scavengers, often found on the bottom of ponds, working their way through plants and decaying matter and such. Now, along with the sow bugs, we did find some scuds. That would be a really tough one to get because they're quite small, and they are also a type of crustacean, also a type of scavenger. And if you see one, they actually sort of look like shrimp a little bit, kind of swimming on their sides. So we really didn't get too much more. We did get one other damselfly nymph, and I'm having trouble finding him in the pan, but we pulled out one damselfly nymph. Damselflies are like dragonflies, but more delicate looking. If you see them when they're grown-ups, when dragonflies land, they land with their wings flat. Damselflies have their wings up. It's a way to tell them apart when they're adults. And the one that we found here is called a common bluet, which is a rather common damselfly in our area. So we just found a handful of stuff quickly. So we did not find enough where we can do an actual biotic index. That's why we took you through the process in the way we did. So we have some mussels here, and a fish, and a damselfly nymph, and some scuds, and some sow bugs, and there you have it on a cold spring day. Okay, everybody. Well, I hope you've enjoyed your time here at the lake, and we've had a chance to take you through various aspects of aquatic ecology. So we've looked at limnology as a whole, we've looked at lentic and lotic systems. Then we'll focus on the lentic or standing water systems, looking at various type of zonations, looking at succession, looking at life in the neighborhood, and hopefully this gives you a sense for what this kind of environment is all about. So I hope you're nice and warm, because we're not, and I hope you're able to, take some decent notes from our time together, learn some new things, and just better appreciate these kinds of places, obviously. So if it were up to me, we'd all be together doing these things together, but since we're not, hopefully we'll function okay in this manner as we continue to do these tapings together. Next time, as always, we'll go over sightings from today, and I think next time we'll probably do a session on herbalism with you, field herbalism. That should be fun. I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Good night.